Welcome to the Chinatown Storytelling Center. My name is April Liu. I'm the Manager of Public Programs and Education here. The Chinatown Storytelling Center, pretty new, relatively new, opened about a year ago, sharing the cultural stories of Chinese Canadians, especially here in Vancouver's Chinatown. So we are so grateful to be here on the unceded and ancestral territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. And I recently learned that this land that we're on was a salty marsh by the name of Squatch Ice. Squatch Ice. It's a Squamish word. Maybe you guys have heard of the Squatch Ice Lodge that's down the street. So just acknowledging this amazing history, this land that we're on, how fortunate we are as settlers here. So I'd like to just start by introducing our speakers. I won't bore you too long with my words here. We're so honored to have some very special guests with us here tonight. Dr. Diana Lary, whom I actually knew as a student at UBC many years ago, lived and worked in China for many years, and is a highly respected and admired professor emerita of modern Chinese history at UBC, and former director at the Center of Chinese Research. And I'm just curious, are there any of Diana's students here by any chance? Raise your hand if you're a Diana student. I know she's had many. So when we heard that Diana was launching her latest book, China's Grandmothers, we were thrilled. We thought, oh, we got to get her out to talk about it. So we're invited here to tell us more about her book. And what I found amazing about this book is that it's not your standard academic treatise. It's actually extremely readable. It's full of beautiful stories and language, and I really especially enjoyed reading the different Chinese phrases that she's translated in there. So and also Diana is a proud and active grandmother herself. And also we wanted to give Diana a special thanks because when she received this year's UBC Emeritus Award for scholarship, she donated that award to the CSC. So with much gratitude. Yeah, thank you, Diana. So I'd like to invite Diana up here for her presentation.
Well, first of all, let me say I'm so delighted to be here in this lovely place, which I've been to only once before, but I will come back to again and again. It just is the most wonderful, positive way of looking at the history of Chinese in Vancouver, which go on BC, striving, surviving hardships, and ending up in such a wonderful place. So that, first of all, then the people who work here who've done so much to organize this, Ramona, an old friend, April, not so much of an old friend, because I haven't met them before, and all of the staff, and especially my fellow speaker who is now here in residence. Let me just say a few words about how I came to write this book. I always had something in the back of my mind. I never worked on women's history, that in China, Chinese society, women, their life improved from very miserable startings with marrying very young and having a terrible mother-in-law. Many accounts of this. And then they came up, things got better, and so I actually proposed to do a book on something called Life Gets Better, and everybody poo-pooed it, no, ridiculous. So I abandoned it for years, but I still had this notion that life did get better for women. And then gradually, as I myself became a grandmother, and as I saw all my friends becoming grandmothers, I realized that's what really got better, because the assumption in China for a very long time, and certainly in the case of peasant children, even today, is that their grandmothers will look after them at least until they go to school. Just one statistic, it's so horrific. There are almost 100 million children in China now who are called the left behind children. Their mothers work in the factories and in the cities. They're not allowed to go with their parents. And this is a big social problem, which the government recognizes. I got all my information on that from then. So then the question is, how does this work, though? Does this work, this allowing children to be brought up by their grandmother, is it a good idea or not? And this is the cover. And the answer is absolutely yes. Look at that woman's face. She's so happy. I picked this one. I don't know who she is, unfortunately. I picked this color in the slight hope that this child might be a girl because it's not wearing red, but I do think it's actually a boy. Almost all the pictures of happy grandmothers, they're holding a child in red, is without question a boy. So I looked at that, and then I came across another thing. I'm just going to have to go through these quickly to get to the one I want you to see. By sheer chance, I came across this lovely boy, I call him, who wrote an article in my daughter's high school magazine that they put out to raise money. And I don't know why I was reading it. She's not strong on magazines, so maybe that's why. But what does he say? He starts talking about his grandparents and how wonderful they were and how he adored them. And he lived his first 5 years of his life with them in Harbin in North China, and then was brought to Canada, where the next few years were, I mean, not to put too fine a point on it, hell, because he really couldn't get on with his parents. So that was sad. If you read this book, which I hope you will, and we may have some here, but it's easily available, it's called We Were Dreamers. The poor parents come in for very, very harsh treatment. So then I wanted, though, to look at why also old age seems to give confidence and serenity to so many women. So this is the grandmother of Bill Wong and all the other many members of the Wong family from modernized tailors. She actually didn't come to Canada. She stayed in Guangdong, but you can see this grandmother's fully confident. She's got a wonderful steely face, almost no decoration. She's not trying to look younger. She's got probably jade earrings. She's got a beautiful jacket on, and she knows exactly who she is. Now, this is quite a different picture than you get sometimes of older women in the West who are looking nothing like as happy, to put it mildly. This one is a very different woman. The Wong family's grandmother was the mother of several very successful sons. This is a peasant woman from Shandong. 30 years later, this is the 1930s, and although she's poor, she still has the same lovely expression of serenity and feeling quite self-confident. This is what the grandchildren were for all of them, though, the apple of their eyes, or as in Chinese that says, the heart and liver's treasure. I think I like that better than the apple of an eye, because what is the apple of an eye? You've got an apple in your eye or what? But this is the heart and the liver. And I really love that one too. And I couldn't resist this one. This is the greatest joy of all, a fat baby. I hope we haven't got any doctors in the room, because doctors strongly object to fat babies nowadays. And this one is not only fat himself, there's no question about his gender, but he's sitting on a fish, the symbol of prosperity. Let me just see. Some of the ones, these are a bit long, I don't want to show, but this is one of my favorite pictures. This is by the great, great cartoonist Feng Zikai, who is the most, one of China's greatest modern artists. And he wrote himself, he called it The Kiss. And I loved that one so much. But I don't know how I'm doing for time, I must be close. But this is probably the ultimate grandmother. Does anybody want to know whose mother this is, celebrating her 90th birthday?
Bai Shan-yong.
No, Bai Shan-yong is in the picture, but he's this little boy. This is the family of Bai Chongxi, the great hero of the resistance war in China. And Bai Chongxi, who's the man, the military man in the middle, was the father of 10 children, 7 sons. The most famous one of whom you know is Bai Shan-yong, who has been here several times. This lady, on her 90th birthday, in one of the worst stages of the war, everything stopped. so that people, all of her family and many other generals and whatnot could fly down to Guilin in the south for her birthday. She does look quite pleased with herself. But look, she's this tiny little figure with all of these are all the grandsons, the 10 grandsons, and the lady standing above the grandsons is their mother. I've always thought Bai Chongxi was hated by Chiang Kai-shek and by many other Kuomintang leaders, and I always think one of the reasons was that he had 7 sons, all with the same mother, which is also very rare at the time. If I just got 1 second, I must mention her. This lady, this has been removed from the internet, but I've luckily copied it before it was removed. This, maybe in sympathy, this lady has made a fortune in China being a grandmother, obviously playing Queen Elizabeth at various ceremonies. I don't know what, but I also want, oh, here's the peasant woman I missed earlier on. This is Gu Xiong, who's a great favorite of all of us in Vancouver. And this is, he cut this woodblock when he was living as a sent-down youth in Sichuan. But you see again the same face, quite content, quite self-confident, even though probably terribly poor. And I must just do the very last. Oh, this is a practice I want to introduce everywhere, a Chinese practice. You all know what it is, but very few people do. When you go to a grave in England, which is where this graveyard is, you're never quite sure what to do. You're supposed to kneel down, put some flowers on. My beloved friend from Hong Kong came to her, this is my parents' grave, and she did the 3 bows. Never happened, I'm absolutely guarantee, in the village of Horinger, ever, but it was the most appropriate thing, and that's a custom I just wish would be accepted here as well. And finally, those are my grandmothers. And my mother with my granddaughter. And this is my 3 treasures. I have to mention this. These are my 3 grandchildren, all taller than, they're now, this is a year or 2 ago, they're all much taller than me now. I'm the little old lady now, and these beautiful children who've brought so much to me. So on that note, just to say I'm so delighted to see you all. And I hope we have many happy grandmothers here, and even more importantly, many happy grandchildren who've had that precious relationship. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Diana. Please save your questions. We will have a brief Q&A at the end of all the 3 speakers. So I'd like to introduce our next really special speaker tonight, the Honourable Dr. Vivienne Poy. She has worn many hats, among them her appointment to the Senate of Canada, for which she served 14 years. Yeah, let's give a round of applause for that. Yeah, thank you. But all the while, she has also been an author and a businesswoman, a designer, community builder, gardener, Chancellor Emerita of the University of Toronto, and, of course, a steadfast grandmother. And I know there's at least 2 grandchildren here. So we're extremely fortunate for Dr. Poy to have made a personal trip to Vancouver, actually, and we're very pleased to welcome her to the CSC. And also, we want to thank you for donating the copies of your books, which are going to be for sale here at Fuheng Curios, and we will have a book signing after the presentations. So please, Vivienne, thank you.
Hello, everyone. The reason why I'm here, I know originally this was Diana's evening, and Diana gave me her book, which I really loved reading. Diana, I love learning history through people's lives, but I have never learned modern Chinese history through grandmothers' lives. And it was really an eye-opener. And Diana mentioned that she mentioned my grandmothers in her book. So that sort of started me thinking. And then, of course, when Diana and Mona found out that I'm going to be in Vancouver, somehow I ended up here this evening. Now, I'm going to talk about my paternal grandmother, because that is the, oh, okay. That is, my paternal grandmothers were mentioned in Diana's book when she talked about the different types of family and how the women in the family behave among each other. So this one is my grandmother, who is a concubine, was a concubine. So she was like the number 2 wife. I just want to mention that last night we had a family dinner, and I had cousins from my mother's side and cousins from my dad's side, and the 2 cousins are also descendants of this same grandmother, and she, 2 of them, in fact, one particular one, kept saying, "You are so much like grandmother," even when I was eating dinner.
She's so beautiful.
Yeah, I think she is beautiful. Now, why is this particular grandmother important? She gave birth to the eldest son, and that is my dad with my grandfather. So the first wife did not have, well, she had a daughter who died in infancy. And then I did ask my mother why, what happened, why was this concubine brought into the family, and my mother said, she's a city girl, and the first wife is from the village. And so when my grandfather was in business, he needed someone who know more about entertaining, etc. And so she became part of the family, and she gave birth to the first 2 sons. And of course, the first son is very important. So, in fact, this is the only photograph we have of grandfather with one of his sons, and that's my dad. Now, this is a very old photo. This is my grandmother, that's grandfather, that's the first wife. I guess she has to be standing next to grandfather, but how she got to sit down, I guess because she gave birth to the first 2 sons. And in fact, she was the one. Now there are other, this is another concubine, that's another concubine, but they were not favored. My grandmother was, because after she gave birth to the first 2 sons, then the wife had 2 more sons. So she became very important in the entire family, and she was always included in everything. Okay, this is my parents' wedding. So that's my dad, my mother, and this is grandmother. So it's her son, first wedding of the eldest son. And I just want to mention, my cousin is here, Ingrid, on my mother's side. That's her mother, who passed away last year at age of 101 in Vancouver. And my husband is here. This is my husband's mother. Now, she happens to be my mother's first cousin. So she was one of the bridesmaids in my parents' wedding. Yeah. And this is after the war, soon after the war. This is my grandfather's gravesite, which is huge, absolutely huge. And we used to always go, Qingming and Chongyang. And here's my own grandmother, and that's my dad, and that's me. I was about 4 or 5. So this is another uncle. This is number 5 uncle from another concubine. Here's my grandmother again. And this is a couple of years after the war, and that's me. Now, I mentioned that the other 2 concubines were not favored, but my grandmother was. See, this is the wife. That's my grandmother, holding on to the wife, because she was always important in the family. And this is another uncle, the third uncle. Many people would know Lê Hao War and his wife. She just passed away last year. And that's me again. And I found this picture. Here's the main wife with the grandchildren. This had to be in the 50s. And I looked at it, the picture again, and I realized that most of these grandchildren here are not hers, her direct descendant. Only this one was. And these are all from the second, the concubine, who was my grandmother. And that's me. I was about 10. And here she is. Here's my grandmother, who remained, who lived a very long life, and she remained very important in the family, always respected, and she died just before she turned 100. Now, this doesn't happen. In fact, I've never heard of it being happened. Her 90th birthday, the entire family was there. All the sons, actually, I was in Canada, I wasn't there, but all the descendants of the entire family was there, the sons, the daughters-in-law, the sons-in-law, many of the grandchildren, and to have a concubine celebrating the 90th birthday with the entire family was very unusual. And I was also asked about me being a grandmother. Of course, this is a totally different era. Now, I have to say, with my own grandmother, she did not, well, in our type of family, we were raised by servants. So she didn't do anything directly with us, but we went to visit her all the time. And we loved to watch her smoking her water pipe. She would make the bubbly sound to show us. And she would pray to Buddha every afternoon. She has her own little prayer room. And so during that time, we can, as grandchildren, because she's totally concentrated, counting her prayer beads, and we would be running back and forth through the room and making faces behind her. And we got away with it because she doesn't notice that we were around. And it was very funny because she always say, and I can't quite understand it, she would say, if you don't behave, I'm going to skin you alive. So I've never heard that from anyone before. But as I grew up, I realized how much I was like her, because I always say, when things turn out right, I would say, heaven has eyes. And this grandmother used to say, heaven and earth know the truth. 天知地知. And, it's the same thing. And I didn't realize how much that I think like her. And she is obviously a survivor. I think I am too, And the other thing was, I didn't realize how much I was like her until I was an adult. When I was little, my mother, for some reason, always believed that I should look like her. And my mother was big bone, she had a wider face, and she kept saying to me, you should eat more, your face is too narrow. And I ate what I wanted, and I was never heavy or skinny, and I didn't understand that until I was much older and realized that I didn't have her bone structure. I have this grandmother's bone structure, who is very small and slight, and she's very methodical in everything she does, and she treats people well. And I didn't. In fact, I remember one time in the early 50s. At that time in Hong Kong, the governors of Hong Kong were not allowed or were not supposed to visit Chinese homes. But the governor, Alexander Grantham, did came did come to our home, and Lady Grantham said, "Oh my God, you look just like your dad." And of course, my dad looked like his mother. And I don't know if my mother heard that. She thought I should look like her. And so, you know, I find that somehow, you know, because she's a survivor, she actually kept peace in the family. Maybe that was why she had so much respect from everyone. And one more thing, because my dad, being the eldest son, had to be with the first wife. That was mother. The other is a jie, which is like, you know, an aunt, his own biological mother. So but what I do know is this grandmother always made roast a duck with taro, because that was my dad's favorite for his birthday. And she does it the old-fashioned way, like in the countryside. She would use straws in an outdoor, it's like a outdoor barbecue, but, you know, with straws. And I used to watch it, and I thought, you know, we have proper kitchens, and we have electrical, you know, gas stove. She wouldn't use that, because to her, that was important. She has to make the duck for her son in the same way that he was used to having. And that somehow remained with me all my life. And I'm really glad that that I have that that sustainability that she has, because I've inherited it. And hopefully I'll survive as maybe as long as she had. And, you know, it's amazing. She had really respect from everyone. And I remember even in her 90s, my dad said, and she had good hearing. Thank goodness I have very good hearing, even at my age. So I know where I got it from. It's from her. And I was also asked about being a grandmother myself. We have 2 granddaughters here. Can you please stand up, just so that they know who you are? The other one, April. No? Okay, all right, okay. Well, they are the 2 eldest grandchildren. To me, the nice thing about being a grandmother is that you don't have to discipline them. You can just spoil them, and you cook for them, and you just have fun with them. And that is absolutely wonderful. Anyway, thank you. Thank you for being here. Thank you.
Wow, it's such a privilege to be able to hear these personal stories and to see these rare photos. I'm sure everyone here has some of these pictures in your family, right? In your homes. And how lovely to see so many people gathered around a grandmother. They're powerful figures. So I'd like to welcome our next very special guest, Ryan Yu. He was born and raised in Hong Kong and came to Canada when he was 15. He is a historian and recently finished his master's in history, studying the networks in early colonial Hong Kong. With his research interest in Hong Kong and Chinese-Canadian history, he is our very much appreciated research and program assistant right here at the Storytelling Center. He's also the apple of his grandmother's eye. So let's give a round of applause for Ryan.
Thank you. Now, I want to tell you about my wonderful childhood with my maternal grandmother, my Poh Poh, and experience as a grandson in the modern days, in the 21st century Hong Kong, and in the Trans-Pacific diaspora context. In this title slide, this was me and with my grandmother. I was about 5 or 6 years old back then, and I was in kindergarten. Personally, more about myself, I was born and raised in Hong Kong, and I was raised by my grandparents until I came to Canada 10 years ago when I was 15 years old. My grandmother was the one who took care of me since I was an infant. So more about my grandmother. She was born in 1936 in Macau. She is currently 86 right now, and she is currently living in Hong Kong. This was her when she was young, and this was her when she was in her wedding gown. She married my grandfather when in late 50s or early 60s, and she gave birth to my mother in 1966. I would like to talk more about my family. There are 5 members in my family in Hong Kong. My grandfather, Gong Gong, my grandmother, Poh Poh, my mom, my dad, and me. I am the only child, and I live with my grandparents, and I was raised by them. There were 3 main reasons why I lived with them and raised by them. The first reason was about the living environment. My family lived in the same apartment, but on different floors. My grandparents lived on the 15th floor, while my parents lived on the 11th floor. However, as you may know, the apartments in Hong Kong are super, super tiny. The apartment that my parents live are super small. It's only 300 square feet, and with only 1 bedroom, while the apartment my grandparents lived is bigger and with 2 bedrooms. Therefore, it was logical that I live and stay with them. The second main reason was due to my parents' occupation. Both my parents work in the financial industries, and they worked full-time from 8 a.m. to around 6 to 7 p.m., Monday to Friday. Therefore, it would be ideal that it was taken care of by my grandparents. Another reason why I lived and I was raised by my grandparents was related to my mom's strong sense of filial piety, 孝順. She is 56 right now, but she never left her parents, my grandparents, for more than 3 weeks in her life, which means they see each other and have dinner with each other almost every day. My parents can just, simply take the elevators up to the 15th floors and see my grandparents immediately. I still, my mom's sense of filial piety was super strong. I still remember when my grandfather was sick, heavily sick 2 years ago. She requested the hospital that to make her a bed next to his sick bed. And keep in mind that it was during the peak of COVID time. My Poh Poh is basically the MVP of the family. She played a crucial role in the daily lives of all the family's members. So usually my grandmother would pick up and drop me off at school since I was a kindergarten up until I finished elementary school. She then looked after me until my parents came back home from work. My Poh Poh cooked for the whole family, and we would then have dinner together on the 15th floor. And then my mom would oversee my homework after dinner for an hour. Then she would then go back down to her apartment. Therefore, I basically live with my grandparents, and I stay with my grandmother basically all the time. My grandmother was also an excellent cook. She basically did all the groceries and cooked for the whole family, as I've mentioned. She cooked breakfast for me and prepared lunchbox for me and my mother to take to school and to the office. She is also a really quick learner. Whenever I said I would like to try some of the certain kinds of dishes, she would just ask around and then learn how to cook immediately, and then she will make it and serve it in front of me. I still remember that when I talked to my friends in elementary school about our families, I will always ask them about, so where are your grandparents? I was pretty dumb, and I thought that in every family there's a pair of grandparents as well. I thought this is the basic family structure. But from changing diapers when I was a baby, taking care of my school uniform when I started going to school, to cooking and feeding me, she picked up her outstanding role as a grandmother since I was born. My grandmother was the first person that held me in her hand when I was born. My mom had to have a C-section, so she was still unconscious when the nurses handed me over to the family. My grandmother told me that when the nurse handed me to my father would say, "Oh, how about let Poh Poh to hold him in the hand first?" So basically, my Poh Poh was the first one who held me in her hand. And do you realize that this picture actually echoes with the kiss, the painting, the kiss that Dr. Diamond Lary has showed us? Yeah, it looks exactly the same, but it's in the front right now. Do you all remember the first words that you all have ever said in your life? No, not really. Many people's first words were probably mama or papa. But my mom told me that my first words were literally ball in Cantonese, like ball. Maybe I was referring to the round-shaped ball as a round-shaped thing because a ball in Cantonese is also called ball. But my mom and I now suspecting that I was actually referring to my Poh Poh in Cantonese. It sounds similar. And I still remember that weirdly, the first time that in my life that I experienced sadness and emptiness, it was on my first day of kindergarten. As I have mentioned that my Poh Poh will drop me off from schools, I cried and cried, even though that she told me that she would pick me up within 3 to 4 hours. I thought she abandoned me and left me. But now thinking back, I feel like it's because the connection between me and my grandmother was so strong that I would not like to separate with her for more than 1 second. So this picture was taken on the same day as the one that on the first slide. There's like a fun fair day in my kindergarten, and I was holding her hand. Under the care of my grandmother, I was definitely a super spoiled kid. I was a huge fan of Digimon, cartoon, and figures. Digimon is like Pokemon, but better. And my grandmother was on the searching team of helping me to hunt and buying all these figures. I actually brought one of them to Canada, and it's in my hand. This one of them that I've kept since I was 3 or 4 years old. As you can see, there's some part missing, and it's basically falling apart. It's not in a really good shape. However, my mom banned my grandmother for keep buying me these figures, for sure. So my grandmother thought of a wonderful tactic. So after my mom left the 15th floor apartment and went back down with my father, my grandmother would tell me to hide in the room while she was in the living room, and then she would cast some magic spell loudly like Mali Mali Home or something like that. And then she would ask me to come out from my room. Then there would be a brand new Digimon figure in front of me. Wonderful, right? I really thought my grandmother was a witch that can, make this magic happen by presenting a Digimon figure in front of me. But now thinking back, it was a really warm and touching thing that she did to me. Even before I left Hong Kong and came to Canada, she actually bought me this brand new Digimon figures. And she always knew, like, as a kid, what I loved. And yeah, I did open it, but I put it back because I won't sell it, but 50 years later, it probably cost like 1 million, maybe. I don't know. So my grandmother doesn't know English, not even ABCD. After I learned some basic English vocabulary in school, I have an urge to share my knowledge with her. So I taught her some basic words like fire or water in English, and then I would give her some mini quizzes. So when she was cooking or packing something, I would suddenly ask her, so what is sui, water, in English? She would then answer me water. I believe up until this day, if you just ask her what is the English word of water, she can answer it perfectly. And commonly, Chinese parents or grandparents are not good at expressing love or saying I love you. However, my grandmother is so different. Sometimes she would just hug me and tell me that I'm her samgonding, just like what Dr. Dan Lary has said about the love, the treasure of heart and liver, like the apple of her eyes. Her love towards me is visible and I can feel it. And I'm the apple of not only my grandmother's eyes, but also my gongong, my grandfather's eyes as well. He is usually the silenced one in the family. As he is deaf, he had to wear a hearing aid all the time. My Poh Poh would still scold me when I did something wrong, but my Gong Gong never scolded me. He took care of me and spoiled me a lot as well. Together with my Poh Poh, they just gave me an awesome childhood. So I left Hong Kong and studied in high school in Vancouver here 10 years ago. Unlike the famous Simu Liu, I left when I was 15 years old, so much older, so I have more time with my grandparents. And this trans-Pacific separation between my grandparents and I began. Although I still travel back to Hong Kong, every year and stay there for like 3 to 4 months, there was still a huge separation between us. But yes, such transnational, trans-Pacific separation did separate us physically, but not our hearts and minds. When I was in grade 11, I wrote a slam poem for my English class. It was a poem about my grandparents, and I got the first runner-up of this poetry. It was a poem written in English, of course, and my mother translated it back to Chinese and read it to my grandparents. It was pretty cringy, so I decided not to put it in the PowerPoint or read it here. But there was always a fear in my mind that something bad will happen to my grandparents in Hong Kong while I'm in Canada. Therefore, I always have my phone on when I sleep. I always know where my passport is. And I have a luggage full of clothes that is always theirs. I even told my best friend, Gareth, who is standing there, that if something happened to my family, can I call you and you send me to the airport? But unfortunately, some nightmares still happened last year. In 2021, my grandfather got heavily sick. I could not see him for the one last time because the distance, but because also of the time. Because last year, if you travel back to Hong Kong, the government requires 21 days of quarantine. I thought I could compete with quarantine. I thought I could compete with distance, time, and death, but I could not. But, both parents and grandparents love their children or grandchildren unconditionally, and most of the time, they love them in return. Fortunately, your parents will still be alive when you got old, when you have your first job or you earn your first bucket of gold. Like, there was a concept of 養兒防老, right? Like raising the children as an insurance for the old age. It's still valid for the situation between you and your parents, right? But what about your grandparents? They love you unconditionally, but they will not expect any paybacks or return because by the time you got financially independent, they may be gone, right? If your grandparents still alive when you are 30 years old, congratulations. But I guess most of the grandparents may be gone when you are a teen or when you're a young adult, right? This is how the life cycle works. Just quickly take my grandfather as an example. He started to get sick in 2019. Fortunately, I returned to Hong Kong that year after I finished my undergrad, and really luckily, I got the opportunity to take care of him to a certain extent, of course. Like, he was on his sick bed. I fed him and helped him to go to the bathroom. But could I really repay him like my mom did, buying all the food for him or paying for the medical bills for him? Not really. Not really. I did try, though. It's an honor that I had the opportunity to look after him, and I'm happy that we had the time that we did have. But of course, now thinking back of my grandmother, I really hope that in the future, I have the opportunity to repay her, maybe, for her unconditional love or care. Well, it is really a competition of time, but with immigrants like us, it's also a competition with distance and space. I would like to end this presentation with one of the meaningful quotes from Dr. Lari's book. And the last sentence wrote, they have, of course, the grandmothers have done this for a long time, but for my grandmother, she has done it forever. Well, it is your blessing, good fortune, or phúc hỷ in Cantonese that I think you can still spend your time with your grandmothers or grandfathers. and it's your fopay, it's your fortunes that you can still repaying them or to taking care of them to a certain extent. Thank you.
Wow. Ryan, your story is so touching. My goodness. I felt like I was living your life with you. And that I got to know your grandparents even though I haven't met them. So thank you for bringing them into the room with us. What a special story. A round of applause for all of our amazing storytellers.